What's up, everybody? My name's thebesttaco, for those of you who are unaware, and today I wanted to go ahead and address some of the top junglers that you can utilize to try and win some of your ranked or casual conquest games. And the reason behind a lot of these jungler selection choices, I want to preface this entire video first and foremost with a lot of these junglers, they're ideal because of the fact that they can power farm so well. And by power farming, I just mean gods that clear the buff camps easily. And not a lot of the junglers can do that. Some of the junglers you have to involve, abilities plus the AA attacks. But for the purpose of this video, like I said, I really just wanted to centralize and really focus around the assassins that I feel are easiest for a lot of new junglers to use, as well as, experienced and well or very familiar, I guess, to the jungle lifestyle. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started here. And I think it kind of goes without saying, but Ninja got to be top of the list for one of the best, if not the best, outright jungler that you could select for conquest and ranked or casuals right now. A large part of that just behind the fact of this ability right here, the universal ring toss. And the interesting part about this ring toss ability, and most people know that it slows. I think most people are aware that it can deal decent damage whenever it's able to, toggle between two gods. But the big thing that I look at for this is a lot of the stuff outside of just the slow, but mostly the protections debuff. You don't realize just how impactful that is in the early to mid game, but it makes it very easy, I think, for Nijan to kind of bully and abuse some of the other junglers in Conquest, at least for establishing early map pressure. That's one of the big reasons why Universe Ring Toss tends to be one of the first leveled up abilities for a lot of different players. I mean, it should be, I think, the first level ability almost every single occasion, but I can definitely see where there are certain circumstances, mostly revolving probably around competitive play, could come into effect and impact that decision. But getting back to the whole talk of Neja. I mean, the 2 is also a fairly solid ability. Myself personally, I prefer to level up the Sash, and my reason for this, at least in ranked gameplay, is that I feel like the 2 is better to level up whenever you think that your team is having constant communication between you, because a lot of times when you invest into leveling up the Flaming Spear, it's very easy for the enemy team to kind of prevent you from just keeping that auto attack chain consistent. And since there's a lot, I think, of chaos that tends to take place in the ranked environment, especially, as well as casuals, of course, I just think that it's ultimately easier for players to prioritize the Sash as their secondary level up ability. And it gives you a ton of power. I mean, 190 at top ranks plus 100% of your physical power. So keep in mind, if you're leveling Neja fairly standard, this is going to be probably maxed out right around levels like 11 through 13. It all depends on what you're prioritizing for leveling up, but it's a really strong ability, especially if you're somebody like myself who really loves building that Hydra's Lament. You really profit off of the additional bonus damage with the Sash level up, and it's felt because you can usually get that auto attack in, as you know, before the final part in the Jazz kit, the Windfire Wheels. Neja is also really strong in conquest play because of this ability, but it can also serve as a negative, so you have to be careful and really pick your team fight or gank opportunity correctly, because as much as it takes somebody out of combat and you're able to deal damage to them in the air where nobody can mess with either of you two, when you land, everyone knows exactly where you're coming down at. So just make sure that you watch the timing around this ability, but it's fairly easy setup for just about every single mid laner out there, as well as just your carries in general. I mean, whether you're relying on damage coming out of your warriors, your guardians, ADC, mid lane, it really does not matter. The big part about this ability is the fact that you have that type of control over the fight by removing somebody from the playing field. So it can be used offensively, defensively, um, whatever floats your boat, but all in all, Neja is just a really solid power farming type of jungler. And also the universal ring toss giving you, or the universe ring toss, somebody's gonna get at me for saying universal. But anyway, the movement speed that it gives Neja as well makes it really easy for you to follow a standard jungle pattern and basically clear out camps faster than some of the other junglers, which is another reason why Neja is known as like a power farmer for the early to mid game in Conquest gameplay. And of course, Neja's mid to late game is nothing to scoff at either, as I just mentioned, because of the Windfire wheels having such a heavy impact on a lot of team fights and just it changes how the enemy team is going to play and position themselves, which is why a lot of players tend to try and utilize this ability aggressively with like more aggressive and kind of forceful Neja positioning. That's definitely one way to get the job done. Another is, just try and lie in wait and look for your opportunity to look for a solid pick off onto one of their carries. But like I was saying, overall, I think Neja just has to be top of the list for Conquest jungle power farmers. But Neja's not alone. And I also want to clarify, this isn't necessarily a jungle tier list, so to say, but these are just the assassins that over my like time of playing, I'm consistently a master's level player, and I find it easiest to climb through the rank ladder and all the divisions and all that stuff by using these junglers that I'm going over now. So secondary on the list, as many of you might have already suspected, it's going to be this guy, Ratatoskr. And the reason why I have to put Retta second here is just because I don't think it's really possible to go wrong with Ratatoskr in the early to mid game. Unless you try to go for an early gank opportunity and you screw it up, then I can definitely see where things might go south for you in that match. But for the most part, Ratatoskr is just insanely safe. And what I mean by safe is that because you get to start out, since Ratatoskr is unique in his own sense, where he has the acorn that he upgrades for in placement of those traditional boots that you see other junglers having to build into, you can level this up on the map itself as long as you have the gold, and obviously if your health and mana sustain hasn't been awful, which it shouldn't be because of Ratatoskir's early game jungle start. Usually you're going to be picking up Flurry as the first ability to clear out all those buffs with. And the cool thing about the Flurry is that unless you're interrupted, you're usually able to get off pretty decent damage with this ability in that early to mid game. So I definitely recommend more aggressive positioning on Ratatoskr, especially after you clear out, the speed buff to the back harpies to the blue camps. And when you go to those mid harpies, you're going to be level 2 on those mid harpies, whichever side you approach first, left or right, all depends on, whether you're chaos or order side. But the main message I'm trying to send here is that you can usually take fights early on at those harpy camps because of Ratatoskr's first 3 levels having such strong, um, I guess, utility behind them. Like I was mentioning with the flurry, usually pretty difficult for a lot of gods to try and deal with the damage of this ability that early on, and the fact that it's just so likely to actually have the full application of the ability without being interrupted. It's definitely a strong one to start off with. But whether you choose to go for the Acorn Blast or the Dash, I mean, both of these still have really strong utility behind them. The thing about the Dash is it gives you some early game survivability, but it also introduces a slow. And I think the slow is something that's kind of overlooked a lot of times by more inexperienced players. But you have to remember, a 20% slow is going to close any gap in the early game, especially when you factor in that a lot of players don't have finished boots. So Ratatoskr is a jungler that I think it's really easy to look for gank opportunities in the side lanes. Mid lane, not so much because mid laners have a little bit of an easier time right now, I think. Um, as far as collecting farm is concerned, it feels relatively safe from a mid laner's perspective, I think, because unless you're looking for invades at the red buff, which, if you're playing Ratatoskr, you might want to consider looking for those early red buff invade opportunities. Of course, it is going to depend a little bit on what your team's composition is. If you see that your team, or if you want to play Ratatoskr, I would definitely try to encourage your team for a little bit more early game aggression. At least 1 or 2 guys that are going to pair nicely with the Ratatoskr. You don't want to be the sole source of early game presence, because if that's the case, then you lose out on a lot of the capability for that early game dominance if your side lanes or your mid laner and stuff aren't helping to complement that early to mid game pressure presence that Ratatoskr can bring. But getting on back on track to kind of dissecting his kit as a whole for the early game, like I was mentioning, if you opt for the dart, as a secondary ability in that level 2, you go from the flurry into the dart. Like I said, there's safety, but there's also utility because of the slow. Decent damage, not the worst damage in the world, not the best, but can be useful for cleaning up. And Acorn Blast, like I mentioned, I mean, this is all about the stun. If you're able to land the stun, then you get some of the best setup in the world, but if you happen to miss it, you could be taking a spill rather early on yourself. So just be mindful of when and where you're choosing to level up and use these abilities. If you're a player that's a little bit more interested in just collecting farm on the map and you want to get more familiar with the jungle pathway itself, then Ratatoskr is going to be able to fit the bill much like Najat would, in the sense that Flurry does a great job at clearing out jungle camps relatively easily. Not only that, but Dart helping you to close the gap between a lot of those jungle space camps. So, or the spaces in between the jungle camps essentially, and it can be useful. But I like to use, for example, coming out of the speed buff, I'll usually use my dart into my harpies or use my dart into the blue camp. It all just depends on how heavy you want your power farm to be, but Ratatoskr can definitely outpace a lot of other junglers because of how easily he can clear out the jungle camps. And that brings us to the last part of Ratatoskr and why I feel like he's one of the second or jungler that I wanted to add to this top 5 list of junglers for jungle play in Conquest specifically. But Through the Cosmos is probably one of the best offensive defensive utility based ultimates that you could ask for. If you want to use it offensively for gank opportunities, fantastic. I mean, covers a lot of ground. You just have to remember that it's usually pretty telling which direction you're coming from. I mean, a lot of this is going to depend on your opponent, but something that I would recommend for Ratatoskr exclusively when you're on the jungle map, and let me just pull this up real quick just to get that little corner reference. But anytime you're on this map, you want to try and go as far back as possible, I think, for trying to reach the ultimates. And the thing about Ratatoskr is, I mean that from like a behind approach. So say you have your team in like the duo lane, the enemy hunter is like at the halfway mark but refusing to extend up. Well, Ratatoskr can just path really deep from behind and try to utilize that through the cosmos to essentially catch the hunter off guard. It's one really big thing, but like I said, it can also be very telling. So timing is key, but patience is also very good to have as well when considering the usage of this ability. But I can assure you, it will provide some really solid damage. It's also going to be probably one of the safest escapes in the early game as well. So if you find yourself, or if you think that the enemy team is a really aggressive composition, for example, Ratatoskr is perfect for being one of the assassins that I think can self-heal himself out and just get away before the situation gets too messy. So that's another big reason why I tend to really place Ratatoskr pretty highly up on like my casual conquest and rank conquest for success rate in gods at least, because it just feels like you have such an easy time farming, and on top of the fact that Through the Cosmos is such a potent setup tool early on, or potent just killing tool. It does deal like a lot of damage, like I mentioned. That's one of the reasons why I had to place Ratatoskr as number 2 here. And now number 3 is where things can get it's going to get a little bit spicy, but also a little bit risky from this point forward, because Pele is not someone that I personally traditionally like playing. Just for me, I just, everybody's got their bowl of cereal when it comes to gods and the gods that they enjoy to play. Personally, Pele isn't a super exciting god for me, but that doesn't change the fact that she's probably one of the best gods that you could use for winning your casual conquest or your rank conquest games, especially for establishing early to mid game pressure. Everything about Pele kind of just screams early to mid game pressure. Her burst damage, her mobility, the fact that she does have some extended range on her kit as well because of her ultimate, and from her little soccer ball that he likes throwing. I call it a soccer ball, but Pyroclast really is a pretty fun ability depending on how well you're able to aim it. But to break it down a little bit further, the main problem that a lot of players tend to suffer when dealing with the Pele is that they don't understand how to appropriately disengage. And at the same time, I can give most players the benefit of the doubt in the early to mid game because when it comes to disengaging from a Pele, you kind of just don't ever really. You really have to rely on your team's peel. So I think Pele is best utilized whenever things are kind of like a ranked environment. Honestly, it gets crazy out there, guys. I'm sure most of you probably already aware of the fact that 9 times out of 10 your teams aren't going to be fully in comms with each other. A lot of people tend to also have their own opinions and ideas of what should be happening on the map, which is why I think Pele can be such a perfect acquisition for those of you who want something that's like reliable, but also gonna pack a punch. And what I mean by reliable in Pele is that her damage is really good in the early to mid game, but I would only really recommend her if you're looking to play kind of stupid aggressive because that's what she's intended for, in my opinion. She needs to get some of that early snowball potential going if she wants to have the same sort of impact from the mid to late. And I think for the most part, a good Pele can prevent the game from going into late. She feels like one of the few conquest-based gods that can actually solo carry a match right now. And that's largely because of the fact that she does have a good bit of sustain. Even after all the nerfs and tweaks, I think that Pele's sustain is definitely still strong enough that she can reasonably carry the early to mid game without really restricting anybody else on her team in terms of farm. And speaking of farm, she's also somebody who farms quite well. She is a really easy time clearing out jungle buff camps, and it's largely because of the fact of, like I mentioned, every single part of her kit just deals damage and helps her to clear, helps her with movement speed, especially on this magma rush. Um, I think that Magmarus is obviously one of the bigger reasons why her mobility can be so detrimental for the enemy team in the early game because, like I mentioned earlier with Ratatoskr and even the Najal, a lot of gods, they don't have boots built online yet. So these guys that already have pre-built movement in their kits have a little bit of an advantage in that early to mid game. And I think that that'll probably be your most abusable factor in a lot of your casual and ranked conquest matches. But the real selling point of Pele, honestly, all comes down to that ultimate volcanic lightning. It's pretty impossible to. I shouldn't say it's pretty impossible to miss because, I mean, granted, on any given day, even the best of players miss their abilities, right? But it is really tough, I think, for the enemy team, more specifically their carries, to find proper positioning when dealing with a Pele because the carries honestly have to rely on their frontlining sources for peel. And if that's not there, or if that falters in even the slightest, Pele can really easily work her way into the backline with this ability and just cause absolute devastation and cause for a lot of the separation to occur that will then allow your teammates to become a little bit more involved, I think, in some of those team fight engagements, especially in the early to mid game. But I think honestly biggest biggest push for Pele and being one of the better assassins to win casual and ranked conquest games is mostly due to the fact that she just has ton of mobility, a ton of self-sustain, and more than enough burst. I'll put it that way. She has more than enough burst, I think, to deal with the average player. And in a 1v1 environment, that's almost always going to go Pele's way in the early game, which, again, like I said, are all pretty slam dunk reasons for as to why I have to list her in this top 5 suggestions guide for assassins to win your casual and ranked conquest games with. When it comes to casuals and ranked games, like I was saying, you're relying on other players, you're relying on your teammates, but these are all gods that I feel you don't necessarily need everybody in your team to be playing perfectly or even doing well for you to have success with. And that's the real driving point that I want to make of this video message is that these aren't gods that are guaranteed to get you wins, but I guarantee you'll probably experience a little bit more success towards winning if you try out some of these gods. After that, though, the next god that I'm going to have to address on the list is a little bit more tricky to play, honestly. But Serket is probably one of my favorite gods to take into the ranked conquest environment for sure, But I mean, she's also really strong in casuals. You probably see her all the time in your casual games, as is one big reason for that. She's just so flexible. I'm focusing on her for assassin right now, but she can feasibly play support. She can reasonably play solo lane to an extent, I think, depending on the team composition. ADC and mid, that's probably a little bit more reserved to your casual games and whatnot, but for the purpose of this guide, like I said, just really want to take a look at her from the jungle point of view. And we'll start things off first with Deathbane, because this is got to be one of, if not the best ability at level 1 for confirming your buffs, which is another big reason why I like her so much in Ranked Conquest, is she feels like the anti-invade god right now. A lot of times when players look for those early game cheese invades on your speed buff level 1, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you see the enemy team support, their solo, their entire extended family coming to visit you at your speed buff, and you're not happy because you're probably not going to have an easy time clearing that. Well, guess what? Serket is your solution. If you feel like you're dealing with a lot of invading players in your games, then I heavily recommend you try out Serket and see if that changes anything up. And like I was mentioning, the big reason for that being Deathbane. It's one of the higher higher confirm abilities, just because of the way that the dashes work. It can be really tough for a lot of gods to interrupt at level 1. And as long as that buff is at like a third of its HP, or I mean, honestly, even when you get the buff to the 40% mark, it feels safe to use Deathbane, and you're gonna kill that buff, and it'll be fine. And it'll be really tough, I think, for the enemy team to try and invade. And having a Serket alone, when the enemy team, a lot of times they'll see Serket. Most players know just how annoying it is trying to outconfirm a buff from a Serket because of the Deathbane. And a lot of times they'll even just forfeit whatever pressure they might have been looking to establish against you with an early invade, and they'll just give it up and just let the Serket kind of do her thing, because it's usually not worth the risk of trying to out secure a Serket at level 1, because majority of the time she'll be winning that trade, and you're not going to be very happy after that, because then she hits level 2 and then she can possibly kill you because of Cobra's Kiss. Another big reason why I like Serket in ranked in casual conquest play is that she has a ton of utility and self peel, which I think is really important from the individual perspective, because not everybody is going to have synergy with their team, not everybody is going to have communications with their team, and Serket, whether you have comms with your team or not, she's still going to cause a lot of chaos for the enemy team, because I can assure you, they're probably not going to be super communicative either a lot of the times. And with that in mind, I think that Serket with Cobra's Kiss, it's one of the best setups you could ask for in the game, or one of the best like beads burner setups. I should probably specify on that as well, in the sense that a lot of times, if you just get the Cobra's Kiss poison stacks out onto somebody, they're going to want to use their bees and run away, because they don't want to let you continuously stack your poison because of Catalyst. As you can see here, 2 poisons, and then you consume with your basic attacks 10% of the target's maximum health is physical damage. If you get 3 stacks, it's 20%. That is a lot of damage with Serket, which is why you don't want to necessarily auto attack immediately after with every single Serket ability. Of course, it all depends on your cooldowns and what any team fight situation or 1v1 situation is looking like, but I think largely Serket can just be so threatening with her first 2 abilities alone. And that's not even getting into the ambush, where it gives her a lot, I think, of this is where the self peel comes into play. Ambush can be a little bit easier to cancel out, but it's usually going to buy you enough time for your Deathbane cooldown to be back up again. And I also think that the fact that you can lie in wait invisible inside of the jungle around choke points, it's kind of spooky stuff for the enemy team, and you never really know where Serket might actually be at. Ambush also closes a lot of space on this ability, so timing can be everything for sure, but Ambush, I think, is a very, very strong ability in terms of the sneak factor that it can provide. But nothing feels quite as good as Serket's ultimate Last Breath. I mean, it's just true damage. Like that's pretty much all you need to know about this ability. This ability will never not be good because of the fact that it deals the true damage over the 5 seconds, and there's just not much to get away from. Cancels out all healing, which I think is perfect, especially in today's current meta where healers tend to fluctuate in and out of conquest matches based on their team's compositions, of course, but having a Serket on your team means that it's also very likely the enemy team won't really want to prioritize healers as often, which can serve as a unintended, um, I guess, service to your own team, where the enemy you won't have to worry about the enemy team and their healer composition or anything like that. But another big reason why I really enjoy Serket for the jungle role is because Serket's one of the few assassins that I truly feel like you can build her full damage, hybrid, or full tank and still get some sort of self-utility service from her. If you go for the full damage route, well, the main priority being the fact that you're probably going to be able to kill just about anybody with a 2-4-1 combination, including the autos, of course. But there's a lot of damage that Serket can deal, and if you build her full damage, I could definitely understand it, but I personally prefer to go with more of a hybrid route for Serket. I'm usually picking up at least one or two defensive items on her because you're still going to be able to deal quite a lot of damage to players just because of Last Breath and this passive. Having those poison stacks, keep in mind, this is 10% and 20% of their maximum health is physical damage. It's not like it's, just like a 10 damage, 10 damage, 10 damage. No, that's like actually 10% and 20%. That's a lot of damage to be applied from somebody who could be building one or two tank items won't affect this or this. These damage numbers are going to stay the same consistently, which is why I mentioned building her a little bit more hybrid with power and defensive items is usually your best bet in casual conquest and rank conquest, just because you'll have the tools at your own disposal for peeling, for tanking, and for initiating. All three things that I think can be pretty tough to accomplish with some other junglers. So Serket having that flexibility to have that level of survivability from building a little bit more hybrid, I think could be the difference between a win or loss in your next conquest game. And last but not least, I feel like this one had to be addressed. Some of you might have seen it coming, some of you might not have, but Awilix. Awilix, I think, is somewhat slept on. I know a lot of you are probably waiting for me to say Thanatos. Someone out there is going to be like, how did Thanatos not make the list? And you know what? I'm going to tell you, honestly, he could be. He could be top 5. I I think that if I were somebody else, maybe I would have put Thanatos in this top 5, but for myself, personally, I just don't feel like I can make a top 5 without including Awilix because her power farm is what really sells her, I think, in the early to mid game. But she does have a little bit of a negative. We'll get into that later, though, as it's not super limiting, but it is a possibility. But anyway, we'll start things off with Awilix and her first ability that you're usually gonna be starting off all your conquest games with. And that'll be Featherstep. But the biggest thing I want to remind all of you for, no matter what camp or what person you are touching, all you want to do with the Wheelish in terms of any early to mid game presence, you just want to play very aggressive. And it's because of her passive, Initiative. If a Wheelish is not taking or dealt damage in the last 5 seconds and she strikes an enemy first, she increases her physical power for a short duration. Oh, cool. How? Oh, 30% for 2.5 seconds. Word. You can bet on it, and I can tell you right now, it chunks. Even at level 1, your Feather Step can chunk. And I think a lot of people don't realize when playing a Wheelish that you're intended to be the initiator with this passive. A Wheelish isn't somebody that you play passive with. She is someone that you power farm with, and then you immediately jump into the action or force team fights. Because with a passive like this, those early to mid game engagements are usually going to go your way. As long as you're not picking your fights like a total degenerate, you're usually going to be A-okay. And getting back to the Feather Step, something else that I think is really huge about this ability is that temporary root and cripple. Even though it's a 0.6-second root and cripple duration, it can oftentimes force players into wanting to use their beads. And not only that, But because of Awilix's Moonlit Charge, as well as the Gravity Surge, if you knock anybody up on Awilix from level 5 and onwards, they're going to use their beads almost every single time. It's such a good beads burner. Even if the enemy team has leaps, they'll oftentimes not want to use those leaps just because of the Awilix and knowing that they'll get pulled right back in for Gravity Surge. But I want to break down Gravity Surge a little bit further because you don't have to necessarily use this ability only for those pools. Does it look cool when you do? Yes. Does it feel awesome when you do? Of course. But I think that a lot of players tend to forget that this ability also has boosted attack speed, boosted physical power, and you don't have, or you have protection against root slows and knockbacks for 6 seconds. That's a very long time. It's possible to just start off a team fight engagement just ulting outright. If you don't feel like you have a good gravity surge pool opportunity, it doesn't matter. You can still initiate a team fight just by proccing this ability alone because it's going to impact the feather step as well. You're going to usually get the auto attacks off in time with this boosted attack speed to apply the feather step damage immediately after the fact, and that'll still serve as like a little bit of a root and cripple like we mentioned already here with the 0.6 second, and that could also provide potential setup for a knockup after the fact with the Moonlight Charge. Because when you get behind somebody off the Feather Step, oftentimes they don't have a chance to turn their cam fast enough or turn their God model fast enough to try and avoid the Moonlight Charge after the fact. So that's something you could also try to practice at home or in your casual or ranked conquest games if you want to really go nuts. Just check it out. How often? Just like do the feather step and then try tossing out a three immediately after the fact and see how often you manage to knock somebody up. I can tell you right now, it's probably going to be a pretty high amount. Of course, it also depends, I think, on what your current, skill range is. But I definitely feel as though she's very simple. She has a lot of burst, but it is possible to limit her with certain god compositions. Obviously, cripples are going to be devastating to a Wheelish. Things like Ares, RDO, um, gods like Nemesis even can be really frustrating because of high mobility and things like that and slows. But I think all in all, a Wheelish is also someone that I'm expecting to kind of rise in popularity potentially in the Pro League even. Her damage just feels really good for power farming throughout buff camps. Um, I think that I tend to find the most success with the Wheelish whenever I just outright rush like levels 1 through 9 of solely focusing a farm really. Unless the enemy team is like egregiously out of position, you can find very blatant gank opportunities. I recommend focusing primarily on your farm for those first 10 levels and then trying to amp it up from there, because usually by then you'll have your boots online, you'll have at least one other item online, hopefully, if you're not getting smacked too hard. I mean, we've all been there before too. But Awilix's mobility with Suku is another big reason why I definitely prioritize Awilix into the top 5, because that early game assassin mobility is really useful when you're looking for buff invades or even just trying to pressure out your side lanes or your mid lane. And what I mean by pressure out the side lanes is that you don't have to necessarily gank to kill. You can gank to establish map pressure. And what I mean by that is, say your dual lane, for example, is getting pushed into their tower consistently, so they're losing minions or minion gold to the tower. Well, you can just show face on a Wheelish and traveling faster than just about any other jungler could from, solo side of the map to duo. Show presence in the lane and then leave and go farm mid lane and split that wave with your mid laner before it's cleared out. If your mid's down to wait for you, of course, you should probably let them know that you want them to hold something for you. But I guess the message I'm trying to express here is the fact that Awilix can cover the map faster than anybody else, especially if you're opting for movement speed items such as Talaria or even like the Masamune Stone Cutting Sword. All just little features that are going to give her a little bit more of that movement speed. And I guess all in all, I just feel like if you're able to get off to a really strong early game start, it feels very difficult to try and actually shut an Awilix down because of how much burst damage she has. But like I mentioned, she's got that self peel, she has that self utility set up as well. And gods that have self peel and self utility setup, I think, tend to bode best in casual or ranked conquest because you're typically not able to rely on everybody around you. And it's for a variety of reasons, usually, right? I mean, not everybody's as experienced as everybody else. Not everybody is going to have the ability to get into comms or communication. And just flat out, not everybody's going to have the same level of synergy. You could know exactly what the play is right in front of you, but that doesn't mean that you're going to land your Kraken off of every single Neja Windfire wheels every single time. I mean, synergy is a big thing when it comes to Smite, and I think MOBAs in general. But I think that with these 5 assassins, you can definitely set yourself up for success in winning just about any casual or ranked conquest game. And like I said, these were just the assassins that I feel have the highest success rate in the games that I play. I play at a master's level um, of ranked, and that is like all the masters players. I think they're pretty familiar with some of the snowball gods, and I think a lot of them would probably agree with this list. But Nija, Pele, Ratatoskr, Serket, Awilix. Those are going to be your top 5 power farming gods from yours truly. I hope this video is able to help, and you guys can let me know down in the comments below what some of your thought processes are, and also all your Thanatos salt rage about how he wasn't included. But seriously, I hope that this does help with some improvements, or at least some of you with trying to gauge what junglers might be best in this current meta. Like I said, these are the top 5 that I prefer, at least for my rank conquest games.